this is my favorite position for when you're hitting it in the morning, or lazy sex. Let's just be serious. When you are having a lazy sex, how many of you guys are guilty for going into spooning? Because I know that it involves very little work from me and very little work from them. It's kind of like equal kind of laziness. I love the spooning method. Now, this is another really great sex position if your man has a larger penis. Because if he does, his penis is gonna be long enough to be able to penetrate you from behind. He can also adjust his body to switch up the angle so he's parallel with your body. He can lean his top half away from you, and you can bend over almost like you're doing doggy, but in a spooning position. Now, if you do have a bigger booty here, whichever side is up, meaning whichever hip is up, use that hand to help you and spread those cheeks, baby. And if you don't want to spread your cheeks, bend all the way over like you're going to touch your toes so that they can get a deeper penetration from behind. Because the more that you bend over, remember you're spooning, so the more that you bend over, the more that those cheeks will spread. And if you don't feel like doing that hinging motion, you can also bring your knees more towards your chest.
Elena Martinez had always believed that marriages were built on solid foundations, trust, communication, and shared dreams. For 8 years, she had constructed her life around this belief, weaving her identity into the fabric of being Mrs. David Martinez. But as she stood in the marble lobby of Sterling Industries, clutching an envelope that could change everything, she wondered if some foundations were nothing more than beautiful illusions. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Elena stepped inside, her reflection staring back at her from the polished steel walls. She looked composed, professional in her navy blazer and pencil skirt. But inside, her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. The envelope in hand contained David's forgotten lunch, a simple excuse to visit his office, though they both knew their marriage had grown cold enough that such gestures had become rare. What Elena didn't know was that in the executive suite, 30 floors above, another heart was breaking in ways she couldn't imagine. Alexander Sterling, CEO of Sterling Industries and David's longtime friend, sat behind his mahogany desk, staring at a photograph he kept hidden in his drawer. The woman in the picture wore a wedding dress, radiant and glowing, her dark eyes sparkling with joy as she danced with another man. That man was David. The woman was Elena. And Alexander had been in love with her since the moment David had introduced them 9 years ago. The intercom buzzed, jolting Alexander from his reverie. "Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Martinez is here to see her husband," his secretary announced. Alexander's breath caught. Elena was here. After weeks of avoiding any situation where he might encounter her, fate had brought her directly to his floor. David was in Chicago on business, wouldn't return until tomorrow. Alexander should send her away, should protect the carefully constructed walls he'd built around his feelings. Instead, he heard himself saying, "Send her in." Elena entered his office like a summer breeze, bringing with her the subtle scent of jasmine perfume that had haunted his dreams for years. She looked surprised to see him. "Alexander, I didn't expect I was looking for David," she said, her voice carrying that gentle warmth that had first captured his heart. "He's in Chicago," Alexander replied, standing slowly. "Won't be back until tomorrow evening." Eleanor's face fell slightly, and Alexander noticed the way she clutched the lunch bag tighter. There was something fragile about her today, something that made his protective instinct surge. "I brought his lunch," she said, then laughed softly, a sound that was more sad than amused. "Silly, isn't it? He's hundreds of miles away, and I'm still trying to take care of him." Alexander moved around his desk, maintaining what he thought was a safe distance. "It's not silly. It's single quotes thoughtful. It's who you are, Elena." The way he said her name soft, reverent, as if it were a prayer made Elena look up at him with sudden attention. There was something in his eyes, something intense and vulnerable that she'd never noticed before. Or perhaps she had noticed, but had chosen to ignore it, the way married women learn to ignore the admiration of other men. "Are you all right?" Alexander asked, because he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Elena opened her mouth to give the automatic response. "I'm fine." Everything's wonderful, that something about Alexander's presence, his genuine concern, made the words crumble before they could form. Instead, she found herself sinking into the leather chair across from his desk. "I don't know," she whispered, and the honesty in those 3 words surprised them both. Alexander sat on the edge of his desk, close enough to offer comfort but far enough to maintain propriety. "Do you want to talk about it?" Elena really looked at him, for perhaps the first time in years. Alexander Sterling was handsome in a quiet, understated way. Where David was all sharp angles and commanding presence, Alexander possessed a gentleness that drew people in. His dark hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and his blue eyes held a depth that spoke of someone who noticed everything but revealed little. "When did you last feel truly seen by someone?" Elena asked suddenly, the question emerging from some deep, unexplored corner of her heart. Alexander's breath caught. The question was so unexpected, so intimate, that for a moment he forgot to guard his expression. The longing that flashed across his features was there and gone in an instant. But Elena saw it. She saw it, and something inside her chest fluttered. Like wings. Double quotes Alexander began, then stopped. How could he tell her that he felt most seen when she looked at him, even in passing? How could he explain that her casual greetings at company parties, her warm smiles at dinner gatherings, had become the highlights of his carefully controlled existence? "I'm sorry," Elena said quickly, misinterpreting his silence. "That was too personal. I shouldn't have—" "No," Alexander said firmly. "Don't apologize, it's just ... It's been a long time since anyone asked me that question." Elena studied his face, seeing something there that made her pulse quicken. "You're lonely," she said softly, and it wasn't a question. Alexander's laugh was hollow. "I run a company with 3,000 employees. I have board meetings, dinner parties, charity galas. I'm surrounded by people every day." "That's not what I meant." "I know what you meant." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths. Elena felt as if she was standing at the edge of a cliff, wind rushing around her, and she could either step back to safety or leap into the unknown. "David and I, we're like strangers living in the same house," she heard herself say. "We have conversations about schedules and bills, and whose turn it is to call the repairman. We sleep in the same bed, but we might as well be in different countries." Alexander's hands clenched into fists. He wanted to reach for her, to offer comfort, but he knew that way lay madness. "Marriage is difficult," he said carefully. "It requires work. I've been working at it for 8 years. Elena replied, her voice breaking slightly. "I've been trying so hard to be the perfect wife, to be enough for him. But I'm disappearing, Alexander. I look in the mirror and I don't recognize the woman staring back at me." Alexander stood abruptly, turning to face the window that overlooked the city. If he looked at her while she was breaking apart, he would do something irreversible. He would cross lines that couldn't be uncrossed. "You're not disappearing," he said, his voice rough. "You single quotes you're the most vibrant person I've ever known. You light up every room you enter. You make people feel seen and valued just by being yourself." Elena rose from her chair, drawn by something in his voice. "Alexander ... You asked when I last felt truly seen," he continued, still facing the window. "It was 3 weeks ago, at the charity gala. You were wearing that blue dress, the one that matched your eyes. David was networking in the corner, and you were alone at our table. You looked at me and said, "Thank you for the donation to the children's hospital. It means more than you know." And for 30 seconds I felt like I mattered to someone. Elena's heart stuttered. She remembered that moment, remembered the way Alexander's eyes had softened when she'd thanked him, remembered thinking that he looked like a man who wasn't used to being appreciated. "You do matter," she whispered. Alexander turned then, and the look in his eyes made Elena's world tilt on its axis. There was love there, not the comfortable, familiar love of long marriage, but something fierce and desperate and beautiful. "Elena," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a confession. She took a step toward him, then another, drawn by something she couldn't name. "How long?" she asked. "How long what? How long have you looked at me like that?" Alexander closed his eyes, as if the question caused him physical pain. "Since the day David brought you to the office to meet everyone. You were wearing a sundress with tiny flowers on it, and you laughed at something he said. And I thought I'd never heard anything more beautiful in my life." Elena's hand flew to her throat. That was 9 years ago. 9 years, 2 months, and 16 days, Alexander said quietly. But who's counting? The air between them crackled with tension, with years of unspoken longing and careful distance. Elena found herself close enough to see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes, close enough to notice the slight tremor in his hands. "I can't," she whispered, but she didn't step away. "I know," he replied, but he didn't move either. They stood there, suspended in a moment that felt stolen from time itself, until Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text message. The sound broke the spell, and she stepped back as if waking from a dream. "I should go," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Alexander nodded, though every fiber of his being wanted to ask her to stay. "Elena, ... What I said ... I shouldn't have, don't," she interrupted. "Don't take it back, please." He looked at her with surprise, and she realized that she meant it. Whatever was happening between them, whatever dangerous territory they were entering, she wasn't ready to pretend. It didn't exist. "I won't," he promised. Elena gathered her purse and the forgotten lunch bag, pausing at the door. "Alexander?" "Yes?" "That woman you're looking for, the one who makes you feel seen. She's looking for you too." She left before he could respond, but her words echoed in the empty office long after she'd gone. That evening, Elena sat in her pristine kitchen, staring at David's untouched lunch on the counter. Her marriage had been built on a foundation of shared goals and mutual respect. But when had she last felt the kind of desperate longing she'd seen in Alexander's eyes? When had David last looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in his world? Her phone rang, David's name appearing on the screen. "Hey, sweetheart," she answered, trying to inject warmth into her voice. "Elena, I've got good news. The Chicago deal closed early. I'll be home tonight instead of tomorrow." "That's wonderful," she said, though something inside her chest tightened with panic. "I know you brought lunch to the office today. Alexander mentioned it when he called about the Morrison account. Thank you for that, even though I wasn't there to appreciate it." Eleanor's breath caught. Alexander had called David. Had he said anything else? Had her husband heard something in his oldest friend's voice? "It was nothing," she managed. "It wasn't nothing. You're always taking care of everyone. I don't tell you enough how much I appreciate that about you." Elena closed her eyes, guilt washing over her in waves. David did appreciate her. He just showed it differently than she needed. Was that his fault? Or was she asking for something he couldn't give? "I love you," David said, and she could hear the sincerity in his voice. "I love you too," she replied, and meant it, even as her heart ached with confusion. After they hung up, Elena found herself at her bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. She was 32 years old, still beautiful, still vital, but when had she last felt beautiful? When had she last felt desired rather than appreciated? The answer came to her unbidden. This afternoon, when Alexander had looked at her, as if she were worth waiting 9 years for. Meanwhile, across the city, Alexander sat in his study, nursing a glass of whiskey and staring at his phone. He'd called David about business, but the real reason had been to hear news of Elena, to know if she'd told her husband about their conversation. David had sounded normal, happy even, talking about coming home early to surprise his wife. Alexander knew he should be glad. Elena deserved happiness, deserved a husband who cherished her. But as he sat alone in his empty penthouse, he couldn't shake the memory of how she'd looked at him, the way her eyes had searched his face as if she were seeing him for the first time. The next morning brought a knock at Alexander's office door. He looked up from his computer to see Elena standing in the doorway, and his heart performed a familiar, painful leap. "Do you have a minute?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. Alexander gestured to the chair across from his desk, but Elena remained standing, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I need to say something," she began, "and I need you to let me finish before you respond." Alexander nodded, not trusting his voice. "Yesterday, when you told me how long you'd felt ... double quotes." She paused, gathering courage. "I went home and I looked at my marriage, really looked at it, and I realized something. I've been trying to be the perfect wife for 8 years, but I've never been the wife I wanted to be. I've never been with someone who made me feel the way you made me feel yesterday." Alexander's hands gripped the arms of his chair. "Elena, let me finish," she said firmly. "I'm not asking you to fix my marriage. I'm not asking you to be my escape or my solution. But I need you to know that yesterday, for the first time in years, I felt like myself. Not David's wife. Not the woman I think I should be. But me." Alexander stood slowly, his blue eyes never leaving her face. "What are you saying?" Elena took a shaky breath. "I'm saying that I see you too, Alexander. I see the way you notice when I'm sad. The way you remember my favorite flower. The way you've been quietly taking care of me from a distance for years. I see the man who's been loving me when I didn't even know I needed to be loved." The confession hung between them like a bridge one they could cross or burn, but could never ignore. Alexander moved around his desk, stopping just close enough that Elena could see the rapid pulse at his throat. "If I tell you what I'm thinking, right now, everything changes," he said quietly. "Maybe everything needs to change," Elena whispered. Alexander reached up, his fingers barely grazing her cheek. "I'm thinking that I've spent 9 years loving you from a distance, and I don't know if I can do it anymore. I'm thinking that you deserve to be loved completely, desperately, the way I've been loving you in secret. I'm thinking that I would rather have one honest moment with you than a lifetime of pretending I don't feel this way." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition, of finally hearing words she'd been waiting her whole life to hear. "I'm thinking," she said, her voice breaking, "that I've been married to a good man who loves me, but I've never been in love the way I am right now. Standing here with you." Alexander's control, so carefully maintained for 9 years, finally cracked. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "Elena, if we do this, if we cross this line, there's no going back." "I know," she whispered. And in that moment, she did know. She knew that her marriage was already over, had been over for months. She knew that she couldn't spend the rest of her life wondering what it would feel like to be loved the way Alexander loved her. She knew that some risks were worth taking, even if they shattered everything you thought you knew about yourself. "I love you," Alexander said, the words emerging like a prayer he'd been holding back for years. "I love your kindness, your strength, the way you make everyone around you feel important. I love how you cry at movies and how you always remember people's birthdays. I love that you see the good in everyone, even when they can't see it themselves." Eleanor's heart swelled with a joy so profound it was almost painful. "I love you too," she said, and the words felt like coming home to herself. When Alexander kissed her, it was with 9 years of longing, 9 years of imagining this moment, 9 years of loving her in silence. Elena kissed him back with the passion of a woman who had finally found the missing piece of herself. Broke apart, breathing hard, foreheads touching. "What happens now?" Elena asked. Alexander's thumb traced her lower lip. "Now you go home and you think about what you really want. Not what you think you should want. Not what would make everyone else happy, but what would make you happy. And when you really know, you come back to me." Elena nodded, understanding that this was her choice to make, her life to reclaim. As she left his office, Alexander called after her. "Elena?" She turned back, and he memorized her face flushed with emotion, eyes bright with possibility. "Whatever you decide," he said. "I'll be here. I've waited 9 years. I can wait as long as you need." Elena smiled, and for the first time in years, it was a smile that reached her eyes. "I know," she said. "That's what makes you different from everyone else. You've always been willing to wait for me to find my way to you." That night, Elena sat across from David at their dining room table, the space between them feeling like an ocean. He was telling her about his business trip, about the deals he'd closed and the clients he'd impressed, and she found herself studying his face as if seeing him for the first time. David was handsome, successful, dependable. He was everything she thought she wanted in a husband. But as she watched him, she realized that he'd never looked at her the way Alexander had looked at her. He'd never made her feel like she was the most important person in his world. "You're quiet tonight," David observed, cutting into his steak. "Just thinking," Elena replied. "About what?" Elena met his eyes, seeing kindness there, but not the desperate love she'd seen in Alexander's gaze. "About us. About what we want from this marriage." David set down his fork, giving her his full attention. "What do you mean? When did you last look at me and feel grateful? Not grateful for what I do or how I support your career, but grateful that I exist, that I'm yours." David frowned, clearly puzzled by the question. "Elena, I appreciate you every day. You know that." "I didn't ask if you appreciate me. I asked if you're grateful for me." "Isn't that the same thing?" Elena felt something break inside her chest, not painfully but with relief, like a bird breaking free from a cage. "No," she said softly. "It's not the same thing at all." David reached across the table, taking her hand. "You're scaring me. What's this about?" Elena looked down at their joined hands. David's grip was firm, possessive, but it didn't make her feel cherished. It made her feel owned. "I think," she said carefully, "we need to talk about whether we're in this marriage because we choose to be, or because we're afraid of the alternative. Elena, I love you. I chose you 8 years ago. And I choose you now. But do you choose me? Or do you choose the life we've built together?" David was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence, Elena had her answer. "I think," David said finally, "we should see a counselor. Work through whatever this is." Elena nodded, though she knew that counseling wouldn't fix what was broken. between them. You couldn't counsel someone into loving you the way you needed to be loved. You couldn't fix the absence of passion with good intentions. But she owed it to their 8 years together to try. 2 weeks later, Elena sat in Dr. Sarah Chun's office, David beside her on the beige couch that had probably witnessed 1,000 confessions. They'd been coming twice a week, talking about communication and expectations, and the different ways people express love. Dr. Chun was patient, insightful, and Elena could see that she genuinely wanted to help them save their marriage. But with each session, Elena became more certain that some things couldn't be saved, only mourned and released. Elena, Dr. Chen said during their 4th session, you've been quiet today. How are you feeling about the progress we've made? Elena glanced at David, who was sitting forward eagerly, clearly believing that they were fixing something. I think, she said slowly, that we've learned a lot about each other. But I'm not sure that learning is enough. What do you mean? Dr. Chen asked gently. I mean that David is exactly who he's always been, a good man who loves me in the way he knows how. And I'm exactly who I've always been, a woman who needs to be loved differently than he can love me. Neither of us is wrong, but we're wrong for each other. David turned to stare at her. Elena, don't say that. We can work on this. David, Elena said, her voice kind but firm. You work on a project. You work on a skill. You don't work on love. Love either exists or it doesn't. Passion either burns between two people or it doesn't. We've been trying to build a fire with wet wood for 8 years and we're both exhausted. Dr. Chun leaned forward. Elena, it sounds like you've made a decision. Elena nodded, tears streaming down her face. I want a divorce. The words hung in the air like a gunshot. David sat back as if she'd struck him. There's someone else, he said, and it wasn't a question. Elena met his eyes, unwilling to lie anymore. Yes. Who? Does it matter? It matters to me. Elena closed her eyes, knowing that this would be the hardest part. Alexander. David's face went white. My friend Alexander. My business partner Alexander. Yes. How long? Nothing has happened between us, David. We kissed once. 2 weeks ago. And that was all. But I've been in love with him for I don't know how long. Maybe from the beginning. Maybe I married you because I couldn't have him, and I convinced myself that what we had was enough. David stood abruptly, pacing to the window. This is insane. You're throwing away 8 years of marriage for a fantasy. I'm not throwing anything away, Elena said quietly. I'm choosing to be honest about what I want, what I need, what makes me feel alive. I'm choosing to stop pretending that I can. Be happy with less than I deserve. And what about what I deserve? David demanded, turning to face her. Don't I deserve a wife who loves me completely? Eleanor's heart broke for him then, because she could see the pain in his eyes, the genuine confusion. Yes, she whispered. You do. You deserve to be someone's first choice, their greatest love, their deepest passion. You deserve to be with someone who looks at you the way I look at Alexander. David sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. I don't understand how this happened. It happened because we were both trying to be people we weren't. I was trying to be the perfect wife, and you were trying to be the perfect husband. But we forgot to be ourselves. We forgot to ask if we were right for each other, not just good for each other. Dr. Chen had been quietly observing, and now she spoke. This is clearly a difficult situation for both of you. Elena, you've been very honest about your feelings. David, how are you processing this? David looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. I'm angry. I'm hurt. I feel betrayed. But mostly I feel stupid. Because looking back, I can see the signs. I can see how we've been growing apart. how Elena has been disappearing into herself. I thought if I was a good enough husband, if I provided well enough, loved consistently enough, that would be sufficient. Love isn't about being sufficient, Elena said softly. Love is about being essential. 6 months later, Elena stood in the same marble lobby where everything had begun, but this time she wasn't carrying anyone's forgotten lunch. This time, she was carrying the keys to her new apartment and the final divorce decree that had been signed that morning. David had been hurt, then angry, then eventually resigned. He'd moved out of their house, sold it, and started fresh in a new city with a new job. In their last conversation, he told her that he hoped she'd find what she was looking for, and she'd heard the sincerity in his voice alongside the sadness. Alexander had waited, just as he'd promised. He'd waited through the therapy sessions, through the separation, through the long months of divorce proceedings. He'd waited without pressure, without demands, simply making it clear that whenever she was ready, if she was ever ready, he would be there. Elena took the elevator to the 30th floor, her heart lighter than it had been in years. When she knocked on Alexander's office door, he looked up from his computer and smiled, the kind of smile that made her feel like the most important person in the world. "How did it go?" he asked, rising to meet her. "It's done," she said simply. "I'm free." Alexander cupped her face in his hands, searching her eyes. "Are you sure? Really sure?" Elena smiled, placing her hands over his. "I'm sure. I'm ready to stop being who I thought I should be and start being who I am. I'm ready to love you the way you deserve to be loved." "And how's that?" Alexander asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Completely," Elena whispered. "Desperately. Like you're the air I breathe and the ground I stand on, and the sky above my head all at once." When Alexander kissed her this time, it wasn't stolen or secret or shadowed with guilt. It was free and open and full of promise. It was the kiss of a woman who had chosen her own path and a man who had waited patiently for her to find her way to him. "I love you," he said against her lips. "I love you too," she replied. "And I'm never going to stop." As Elena stood in Alexander's arms, she thought about the foundation of marriage she'd once believed in: trust, communication, shared dreams. She still believed in those things, but now she understood that they weren't enough. Real love, lasting love, required something more: the willingness to be vulnerable, to be seen completely, to be chosen not just once but every day. She'd spent 8 years building a marriage on a foundation that looked solid, but couldn't weather the storms of real life. Now she was ready to build something new, with a man who had loved her through her marriage, through her confusion, through her painful journey to self-discovery. Some people might call it a scandal, the CEO's secret desire that unraveled a marriage. But Elena knew better. It wasn't a scandal. It was a salvation. It was the story of a woman who had learned the difference between being loved and being cherished, between being appreciated and being adored. And as she looked into Alexander's eyes, she saw not just love but reverence, not just desire but devotion. She saw a future where she could be completely herself, where she could love without reservation and be loved without condition. The foundation of her first marriage had crumbled, but from its ruins she was building something stronger, something real, something that could last a lifetime. After all, the best love stories weren't about finding the perfect person. They were about finding the person who was perfect for you, even if it took 9 years and a broken marriage to figure it out. Elena Martinez had always believed in solid foundations. Now she knew that the strongest foundation of all was the courage to be true to your own heart, no matter how much it might cost you. And in Alexander's arms, She was finally home.